Hello, sixth graders. This is an example of a dialogue between Simplicio and Sagrado on the subject of King Arthur. Simplicio starts out by saying that stories of King Arthur were a good way of teaching kids about history. No, says Sagrado, they weren't a good way of teaching kids. This would be a good place to reverse the argument. Sagrado asks a question, and we want to get a sense of what it is that Simplicio is getting at. And so we would add in at this point a discussion between Simplicio and Sagrado, and Simplicio is going to have to say, well, King Arthur stories teach children about knights and kings and other stuff from the Middle Ages. And that now becomes the basis of Simplicio's argument, that King Arthur stories are a great way of teaching about knights and kings and other stuff from the Middle Ages. And Simplicio can give a fairly elaborate argument here. And then Sagrado is going to say they weren't a good way of teaching kids. Well, why not? Because it taught kids that pulling swords out of rocks when you are 9 leads to being a king. And Simplicio can say, oops, sorry, I didn't know that. And that's fine. But in some ways, it's much more interesting if Simplicio were to reverse the argument at this point himself and say, so why is that a bad thing? And then Sagrado has to respond and has to say something along the lines of, King Arthur stories teach children that magic will come along and make them powerful. Really, the only thing that makes children into adults is practice at valuable and that seems to be the basis of Sagrado's argument. And now it's possible for them to have a much richer conversation because Simplicio is going to be talking about the value of learning stories from the Middle Ages in order to study the Middle Ages, and Sagrado is going to be arguing against the question of magic and that the stories of King Arthur are too magical. And now it's possible for Sagrado to make an argument, say, about Harry Potter. And he could say Harry Potter is a magical story, but those stories teach children to think ethically and morally. And you can see that I'm not being a very good typer this morning. But that gives you a sense of the way in which Simplicio could argue against what Sagrado says and the ways that Sagrado can argue against Simplicio. I hope this helps you with this week's exercises in class.